Cavatayo, and I will be presenting my issue review topic on heroic medicine. My main concern for the issue review will focus on heroic medicine, whether or not it is morally permissible to allow one to die or to be given a chance to be saved by heroic medicine. In this assignment, I will use Kant and Singer that are for heroic medicine, then Rawls and Bentham will be used against the argument for heroic medicine. For this review, I will allow you to explore the ethical facts based on deontology and utility. Each premise will contain details about my topic along with a knowledge of my sources to give you a complete understanding of this analysis. Immanuel Kant was one of the most influential philosophers in the history of Western philosophy. His most important contribution in philosophical history was deontology, or the study of obligation and duty based on ethics that involves rights. In Kant's views, the only feature that gives an action of moral purpose is not the result that is achieved by that action, but the reason that is behind the action, and the only purpose that can support an act with moral value, Kant argues, is the one that arises from universal principles discovered by reason. For my issue, I will use Kant and his statements of the categorical imperative to argue for heroic medicine. Persons should act in accordance with the universal law. Actions cannot be applied universally to all persons, then they should not be used at all. Person is a being with reason and goodwill. Treat a being with reason and goodwill, whether in your own person or in the person of another, always at the same time as an end, and never simply as a means to an end. Persons should be treated as persons with reason and goodwill. Treating a being with reason and goodwill as a means is treating a being with reason and goodwill. Killing a person treats a person as a not person, therefore killing a person is morally impermissible. Persons act as legislators in the kingdom of ends. The kingdom of ends is a systematic union of rational beings who gives consent. Consent is creating laws that are not universal and that protects and acts in accordance to a being with reason and goodwill. Heroic medicine is the act of aggressive medical practices of treatment that are particularly used for dangerous and unproven treatments. These medical practices become a part of treatment to keep patients alive. Patients are persons with reason and goodwill that in this case are terminally ill or near death. It is then the doctor's duty to save these patients through the act of heroic medicine practices. Doctors are also persons with reason and goodwill that treat the patients and try to keep them alive. In the act of practicing heroic medicine, these treatments chance the possibility to save the lives of patients. Kant implies that anyone who sells an integral part of their body violates the principle and thereby acts wrongly. An agent treats a person merely as a means if his treatment of the other prevents him from having the opportunity to consent to this treatment. As mentioned above, killing a person treats a person as a not person, therefore killing a person is morally impermissible. This correlates to the fact that if one does not try to save patients' lives, then the act was morally impermissible. I rely on the rest of this section, and the action is morally permissible in accordance with a duty, if and only if it expresses respect for the worth of humanity. My conclusion: therefore, at this point, when assistance was provided to rescue the patient's life, the doctor would be obligated to practice heroic medicine and do whatever it may be to save the patient's life. Relating this back to Kant, rescuing a life by practice of heroic medicine is morally permissible. Now into my second philosopher, John Rawls. Rawls was arguably a political philosopher that devoted his work to deontological ethics, but the main focus was on the theory of justice and fairness. Rawls' first concept of equality is that it is an equal issue of advantages. While these equalities will influence the life chances of everyone in society, against the individuals will be free to express their freedom as they desire within their fair set of rules. For this argument, I will use Rawls to argue against heroic medicine. Inequalities are just only when conditions of equal opportunity obtain. Conditions of equal opportunity obtain only when a person's fate is not determined by morally irrelevant factors. One's fate is not determined by morally irrelevant factors only when it is determined by one's choice and efforts. One's fate is determined by one's choice and efforts only if it is not determined by social circumstances. Therefore, inequalities are just only when they're not determined by social circumstances. One's fate is determined by one's choice of efforts alone if it is not determined by one's talents and abilities. Therefore, inequalities just only when not determined by a person's talents and abilities. If the patient is not able to determine their fate, then other responsibles make the choice concerning the moral factors. All patients have the right to choose to accept the practice of heroic medicine or not. There are no inequalities against patients' decisions on whether they choose to obtain the procedures. One who is treated under the practice of heroic medicine must obtain equal opportunities. When treated to be saved, their fate will be determined by moral factors. It is the choice of the patients whether their fate can be determined by moral factors or not. If the patient is not able to determine their fate, the others responsible make the choice concerning the moral factors. All patients have the right to choose to accept the practice of heroic medicine. There are no inequalities against the patient's decisions on whether they choose to obtain the procedures. Therefore, patients have the right to choose if they want to participate in the practice of heroic medicine. Based on Rawls' premises, it shows that when focusing on inequalities versus equalities that are connected to justice and fairness, the practicing heroic medicine would be morally impermissible. And my third philosopher, Peter Singer, is one of many utilitarians that has written about many topics that are concerned with ethics. Most commonly, famine, affluence, and morality. Singer discusses that ethics is about morally doing the right thing with a balance of equality. Based on this statement alone and his premises for the portion of my issue, we will use Singer to argue for the act of heroic medicine to save one's life. The suffering caused by lack of food or shelter or healthcare services is bad. If we can prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing something of comparable moral importance, then we should. We can alleviate this poverty-induced suffering without sacrificing something of comparable moral importance. Thus, we ought to contribute as much as we can to eradication of poverty until doing so harms us more than it benefits them. Heroic medicine is the act of aggressive medical practices for treatment that were particularly used for dangerous and unproven treatments. In the act of heroic medicine, it is also considered as a healthcare service. We can prevent something from happening by using heroic medicine that may not sacrifice lives that are worth of more of comparable moral importance. Heroic medicine can alleviate the suffering of one's pain. Killing a person who prefers to continue living is therefore wrong. Doctors and patients should be permitted in some circumstances to kill humans. Singer notes that doctors often withhold medical treatment or nourishment from crippled or prematurely born infants, or from elderly people who have asked them that no extraordinary measures to be taken to save them. Letting people die, Singer says, is often crueler than a humane form of euthanasia would be. By doing so, heroic medicine can ultimately eliminate any harmful matters that may or may not benefit those involved. During this practice, those who decide to involve themselves understand moral factors as well as moral importance when sacrificing the lives of their loved ones. Among the importance of human interest, avoiding pain is one that quickly alters human life. Heroic medicine can prevent pain and give relief to those associated. Singer distinguished between preventing evil and promoting good, and contended that the persons in affluent nations are more obligated to prevent something bad or evil from happening if it is in their power to do so without having to sacrifice anything of comparable importance. My conclusion: therefore, prevention of pain and suffering that is related to the factors of what is considered morally important can and should be sacrificed if necessary to save a human life with the act of heroic medicine. Singer's ideas of ethics has a wide range of viewpoints. While relating to this topic, practicing heroic medicine to save one's life would be morally permissible. Now for my last philosopher, Jeremy Bentham. Bentham was primarily known for his moral philosophy relating to the principle of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism ethics evaluates actions based on consequences. These consequences are relevant to one's pains and pleasures. For this argument, I will use Bentham to argue against heroic medicine. Morally permissible acts provides the greatest number of pleasure for the greatest number. In order to determine the greatness of pleasure and the means of effectively generate such pleasure, a principle for determining utility is required. The principle of utility is constituted by 7 variables of measurement: intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, fecundity, purity, and extent. Intensity is a measure of degree of extremity, concentration, and depth. Duration is a measure of temporal continuance. Certainty is a measure of confidence, probability for or against a predicted event. Propinquity is a measure of immediacy of an event. Fecundity is a measure of the probability that an event will generate or fertilize similar events. Purity is the measure of the probability that an event will generate or fertilize dissimilar events. And extent is a measure of the exponential effect of an event's products on a field of individuals with increasing immediacy. Again, heroic medicine is the act of aggressive medical practices of treatment that were particularly used for dangerous and unproven treatments. Through the practice of heroic medicine, many are involved in this situation when dealing with the pains and pleasures of this all. The patients are primarily the ones who are involved when dealing with treatments. The intensity of heroic medicine considers the patients is fairly high. They are the ones undergoing surgery receiving extra treatment to save their lives. Duration is indifferent when focused on heroic medicine. Time is considered. Certainty is a must and is highly valued. It is the patient's life at stake. Propinquity, again, is applicable to heroic medicine in that the patient's lives are at risk. Fecundity and purity both generally share valued effects on heroic medicine, and extent does not really apply to this topic. Next, the doctors and medical staff are generally involved. They are the ones who actually practice heroic medicine on the patients. Intensity is expressed as a complete focus on the concentration of saving the patient's lives by doing the procedures that will ultimately allow the patient to survive. Duration is also expressed as a main concept when practicing heroic medicine. Certainty can be demonstrated as the willingness and confidence the doctor has to complete the procedure. Procuity would be demonstrated as the doctor, to an extent, would quickly need to be involved when practicing in heroic medicine. Fecundity is also demonstrated, in which the doctor would have to complete the procedure correctly without any harm done to the patients. Purity is expressed in a similar way, but it would be considered the opposite of an outcome, as if the patient were not to survive the doctor's inability to complete the procedure correctly. Finally, extent is demonstrated in the act of how the doctor has completed the treatment, and then on how it would affect the patients and their families. The patient's family, I believe, would lastly be recognized as one of those who receive the greatest pains and pleasures regarding heroic medicine practice on their loved one. Intensity is conveyed completely on what the outcome may be for the patient. Duration is also conveyed as the main focus when concerned with a loved one that is affected by heroic medicine. Certainty is also expressed by the faith and hope a family has towards the intentions of the treatment. Procuity would be demonstrated as the family members being able to understand the possibilities when practicing heroic medicine. Fecundity is also demonstrated, in which family members would have to accommodate to the change of the patient in the procedure if the procedure was successful. Purity is expressed in a way that cannot be as easygoing on the family members, in which they could not accept the outcome and understand the situation. Extent is not expressed in the relation to this issue. And finally, for my conclusion for Bentham. For this argument, Bentham was used to understand pain and pleasures relating to heroic medicine. Bentham considered the extent of this pleasure, since the happiness of the community as a whole would be nothing if it was not for the greater count of the human interest. The basis of utilitarianism is defined as the meaning of moral obligation by reference to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people who are affected by performance of an action. In which I would like to conclude my argument stating that through these premises, heroic medicine would be morally impermissible. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.